Revolutionary theory categorizes the events of a revolution into three stages. The first consists of conditions existing prior and the initial incident that catalyzes the uprisings. The following stage is the most significant aspect of a revolution as it entails the demise of the old regime and the conflict caused by exchanges of power. The final stage of a revolution is the changes that the revolutionaries must instill among the mass population, either by force, conditioning, law, or social pressure. These changes often are aimed at familial, religious, educational, economic, and social structures that existed pre-revolution and were seen as corrupt and intolerable. Though each unique, the French, Chinese, and Egyptian revolutions followed the central principles of the revolutionary theory. Revolutions are caused by discontent held by the majority due to intolerable conditions that exist in the political, economic, and social structures in a nation. Often the middle and lower classes are unhappy with unequal distribution of power and wealth, resulting in a loss of faith towards the government and upper class. For a revolt to take place, there must be a strong desire for change as well as an initial catalyst to spark an uprising. Students, would anyone like to tell us about the events in your first stage of revolution? Yes, France, go ahead.
In the late 18th century, the Ancien Regime socio-economic model adopted by France gave power to the incapable monarch Louis XVI and his wasteful wife Marie Antoinette. Due to this model, inequality existed between estates. The third was subjected to high taxes and poverty. When Jacques Necker was fired, revolts initiated, kickstarting the French Revolution.
Very good, France. Excellent examples of the causes behind your revolts. Who's next? China?
The majority of the Chinese population faced similar conditions as the Third Estate under the rule of the KMT nationalists and was also exposed to labor exploitation, political instability, and economic corruption. Chiang Kai-shek's policy of non-resistance against Japanese forces infuriated the masses and catalyzed strong desire for revolution.
Excellent points, China. Now, Egypt, could you give us some insight on what sparked your revolution?
In Egypt paralleled those in France and China due to the existing social hierarchy under the reign of Hosni Mubarak. Among other suppressing regulations, citizens faced strong censorship and violent acts of brutality due to judicial corruption. Though having suffered these conditions for over 30 years, revolutionary sparks only emerged following Tunisia's victory and the death of Khalid Mohammed Said.
Good job, class. Now we move into the second stage of revolution, the turmoil. It occurs when the mass population loses all faith in the existing order and contains the battle between revolutionaries and reactionaries to eradicate the old order. Once collapsed, it is followed by the struggle to maintain power and resist a counter-revolution. This is often a time of instability as power may shift between rivals until one group is able to defeat all other opposing forces. France, go ahead.
Acts of revolts included the attack on the Bastille prison, the march of 20,000 to Versailles by angry fish ladies, and the September massacres. Louis XVI and many nobles were thought to be conspiring with the Prussian and Austrian armies in hopes of a counter-revolution. This led many to their violent deaths as the French peasants became radical. When Louis XVI attempted an escape to Austria, faith in the monarch squandered and resulted in the birth of the French Revolution. The old order collapsed entirely during the execution of King Louis XVI, ending the long line of monarchs in France.
And you, China?
After the creation of the Chinese Communist Party, civil dispute broke out in China as the KMT struggled to maintain power. Though having allied twice, once to defeat northern warlords and secondly against Japanese forces, rivalry continued as CCP members faced constant persecution and internment, which accounted for the Long March, an escape of 87,000 CCP prisoners. The bombing of Pearl Harbor led to U.S. support for China, and the Japanese surrendered after an atomic bombing of Hiroshima. The Civil War continued between communists and nationalists, as popular favor bounced between the two. The KMT's mistake of sending too many troops north allowed for the final communist takeover and the establishment of the People's Republic of China.
Go ahead, Egypt.
A photo depicting Khalid Mohammed Said's corpse spread through online Egyptian forums and caused outrage, sparking plans of public demonstrations. After the first protests, Mubarak responded by shutting down the internet. Revolutionaries retorted by rallying information through informative posters. Over 100,000 protesters demonstrated on the streets of Cairo alone. Mubarak's televised announcement to step down in the following term failed to disperse crowds and resulted in his supporters attacking protesters riding camelback. The army turned against him after this event and left Mubarak with no other choice but to resign. The revolutionaries were able to topple a dictator who had ruled for over 30 years.
Good job, class. Those are all great examples of the battle to collapse the old power and the struggle to maintain power. Now I'd like to discuss something important that is not part of the revolutionary theory. Although not included in the theory, we found it was crucial for revolutionaries to have a means of communication in order to successfully spread revolutionary ideals and initiate a strong foundation of supporters. In France, the newspaper A Friend of the People, written by Jean-Paul Marat, spread radical ideas and instilled bloodlust into the minds of the French people. In China, Mao Zedong established a strong foundation in the countryside by using propaganda to promise freedoms and a utopia for peasants who supported the CCP. In Egypt, revolutionaries used video footage spread through social media to incite citizens to take part in public demonstrations. So you see, without a means of communication, revolutionaries would not have been successful. Now we move into the third stage of the revolutionary theory. During this stage, revolutionaries must institute changes among the population that correct the conflicts that had existed in society pre-revolution. Revolutionaries must quickly implement reforms and dissolve resistance by counter-revolutionary forces. This can be accomplished through several methods such as violence, propaganda, or ostracism, and must occur in order for revolutions to be successful. France, what did you accomplish after overthrowing Louis XVI?
France abolished the traditional feudal structure by instating the Declaration of the Rights of Men and the Civil Constitution of the Clergy. The constitution was renewed 3 times, but with minimal impacts. Later in the Revolution, radical methods of instituting change were taken through the Committee of Public Safety and the National Razor. Censorship was restored with new freedoms revoked. France became a de-Christianized society under Robespierre's rule when he changed the traditional calendar and created the Festival of the Supreme Being. Though initially having positive ideals, France underwent a reign of terror and reintroduced conditions existing prior to the revolution.
Interesting results. China, how did the CCP's takeover affect the country?
Mao Zedong implemented the 5-year plan in China, having succeeded in doubling industrialization. He then continued with the Great Leap Forward, which mobilized the mass population as a labor force for steel production. This, however, proved to be his greatest failure, as famine was a major result and production did not increase significantly. To regain authority, he created the Cultural Revolution, which persecuted any believing in the Four Olds. Other than momentarily boosting industrialization and redistributing land, Mao was unable to accomplish other promised reforms. Similar to Robespierre's rule, the PRC consequently led to the death of millions.
I see. And Egypt, what about your country?
Other than ending Mubarak's dictatorial regime, the Egyptian revolutionaries failed to achieve anything else. The army's seizure of power resulted in harsh and violent crackdowns when protesters returned to the streets to demand a quicker transition to democracy. When a new leader was finally elected, conditions worsened as people faced food and fuel shortages. The new Islamist constitution raised concerns with human rights groups, and Mohamed Morsi's actions caused another wave of demonstrations. An army ultimatum removed him from power mid-2013, and protesters have again found themselves fighting for the rights and equality they deserve. It is uncertain what will be the ultimate outcome of the Egyptian revolution.
That is disappointing. And though we see that the French, Chinese, and Egyptian revolutionaries successfully overthrew their old autocratic regimes, a truly socialist and democratic society was not accomplished due to power being taken by inept and often corrupt new leaders. Although the initial intent was to place power in the hands of the majority, eventually a totalitarian government resurfaces. This is described as the pendulum of power in the revolutionary theory. Revolutionary leaders had promised reforms in society such as the abolition of social hierarchy, an improved economic system, and renewed constitutions affirming the rights and freedoms of individuals. However, changes that occurred were often short-lived and didn't necessarily improve conditions originally suffered by the majority. In France, Robespierre's radical beliefs and actions led to the creation of the Committee of Public Safety, resulting in the reinstitution of social suppression and the Reign of Terror. Mao Zedong overlooked religious and social freedoms that he had promised because of his overambitious aspirations in industrialization. In Egypt, the overthrow of Mubarak resulted in overall instability as power continues to shift between inept and corrupt governing parties. Though each revolution followed the layout of the revolutionary theory, the changes that were instilled failed at successfully eliminating the inequalities and intolerable conditions that had existed previously. The dreaded bell. I can see most of you have already packed your things, so goodbye and see you all tomorrow.